Willslock Forge is a small bladesmithing and knife making forge in Staffordshire, England, and I'm Chris, I'm the bladesmith. So my main focus here at Willslock Forge is hand-forged UK legal pocket knives. However, I do also make historical reproductions based on or inspired by historical archaeological finds from across Northern Europe and the British Isles. So Viking Age knives and Anglo-Saxon period knives. For forging, I've got a very small anvil, which is perfect for the size of knives I make. Most of my knives are under 3 inches because they're UK legal folders. Then I've got a coal forge and a propane forge. They both have their advantages and disadvantages, which is a whole other topic that we could discuss for hours. I've always used pocket knives and folding knives, and I've had many jobs in the past where I've needed a knife every day. So I've always carried one. And then when I came back to the UK in 2018, I was looking to buy a traditional, high quality, ideally hand-forged pocket knife that was also UK legal carry so that I can carry it around with me and not need to worry about getting in trouble. And I could not find one. So I decided I'll try and make one myself, and I got addicted, and here we are several years later. So I could talk about the process of making knives for literally hours. There's a lot of research that goes into it, especially the historical techniques. To break it down into simpler steps. So step one, you've got to find your materials, clean them up, make sure you know exactly what metals you're working with. Working with unknown metals is a recipe for disaster. I do a lot of historical blades that use old wrought iron, which is found all over the UK. They don't make it anymore, but when you etch it, it has a beautiful pattern. So you can use the wrought iron and layer it and laminate it with types of steel, or I can use carbon steels like 1095 or 01. You heat it up, wait till it's flexible, and then you can form it using the hammer into the shape of the blade that you want. Forging any scrolls or elaborate patterns, or forging the tang, forging the bevels. And for the historical knives, I forge them to finish, so minimal power tools, and try and get them as close to the finished product on the anvil as possible. And you only do it to about 80–90% of the final dimensions of the blade, because you don't want it too thin when you heat treat it to avoid it cracking or warping. For the first couple of years I was doing this, I only used hand files, which means you've got to do a lot of work by hand before you can heat treat the blade, and you can't use the files after it's heat treated. However, I have upgraded now and I've got a small belt grinder, so that does speed up the process a lot. And then you can actually work on the bevels after heat treat as long as you're careful not to overheat the blade. The stamping process is putting the WF for Willslock Forge on my blades. For 90% of the blades I do actually use a stamp, which is just a chisel that I carved out the WF in mirror image on the end. It's heat treated, so it's nice and hard, and that will stamp the WF into the hot blades. And then you've got to heat treat it, which is hardening it and tempering it to make it more durable and less brittle. And then you've got the assembly process, the handle making process, the woodwork, and then finally the leather work where you've got to make a sheath for it. In terms of handle materials, one of the things that I believe to be really important is to only use natural materials. I don't like to use any synthetic materials or plastics or resins, so all of the wood and leather and bone that I use is locally sourced wherever possible. And if I am using exotic woods for the non-historical knives, I'll use UK-based companies and use offcuts and reclaimed wood that is from a sustainable source. Once you've made the blade and you know that it's heat treated and that nothing can go wrong with the blade after that point, you've chosen the handle materials, you've chosen a final design. I think my favourite point is when it actually starts to come together and you can see the finished product and you can see what the knife is going to be like when it's finished. There aren't many people in the UK making hand-forged UK legal folding knives. There are quite a few bladesmiths around. Many make kitchen knives or bushcraft knives or hunting knives. And a few people make folding knives, but very few people make hand-forged folding knives, and even fewer of those are UK legal carry. So that's kind of the niche that I'm trying to aim for, because for me, I want to carry a knife that I can take anywhere with me, that's always in my pocket and I don't have to worry about it. And I also want one that's hand-forged and traditional and natural materials. And as I said, I couldn't find any myself, so I had to make them.